you talk a little bit about the source material? Because Whit Stillman discovered it. Not a lot of people have heard about it. And what does it give you just as the building blocks for this character?
Well, when I was first sent the script, it was such an outrageous script. I kept kind of flipping back to the title page going, okay, Whit has written something in the style of Jane Austen, not actually based on a Jane Austen book that I've never heard of, but he really had. And so going back to the novella, it's even darker than, she as a character is even darker and kind of more ruthless and very, very mean to her daughter in the novella, which is still really funny, but
only partially mean in the movie.
Just partially mean, yeah. As a little sidebar mean to the daughter, but I don't know. I really liked the novella. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to have this kind of extra reading to do, as an actor, and she's it's really fanciful, but I suppose I think to myself, the central part of this part for me was the conversation with her daughter, where she's saying, we visit, you've got to sort out your security. How are you going to live if you don't find a husband? Because underpinning all of her behaviour really is she's very much a product of the time period that she's in, and certainly for a woman at that time, especially if you were a bright, intellectually sharp woman who remotely was interested in having kind of any kind of sexual freedom or, any kind of freedom, really, education, I think you had to box a little bit clever. And obviously Jane Austen was a great mind and, and all of that, and lived under these kind of rigorous social rules. And I suppose fancifully, I think of Lady Susan as being sort of her shadow, that she, at age 20, kind of sort of expressed her frustration with the situation that she was in, and then kind of went, oh, that's a bit much, and put it in a drawer. And, it wasn't till 40 or 50 years after she died that her nephew published it.
I think what you're describing is a 21st century woman who happened to be born in the 18th century.
Exactly, yeah.
What would she be like today? Would she be running a Fortune 500 company?
Absolutely, there'd be no story. She'd have a very nice job, she'd have a few lovers, nobody'd say anything, daughter would be at boarding school, nobody'd care.
One of the tricks of the story and the tricks of the film and the tricks of the character is that she is both kind of heroine and villainous. And as you're first kind of talking to Whit about the making of this movie, what kinds of conversations are you having around that balance, about which way it should go, which way it's written, and where you find the balance between the two? Because she is in many ways a very likable person that you end up loving to dislike.
Have you met Whit?
Yes.
Okay. So there wasn't really those sort of conversations. I think the thing about Whit, and I find him very similar to Scorsese in that respect, is that I think he brews and percolates for an extraordinarily long time. I mean, he went subterranean for at least, 10 years or so?
I think he's been working on this for at least that long.
Yeah. So there's been quite the gestation. So I think by the time he actually casts people, he's picked somebody whose sensibility is likely to match his own, so that he doesn't have to have those sort of conversations, really. He's a very elegant person all around, and so I think it would almost feel peculiar to be saying, do you think I ought to be likable or not? I think he'd be so repulsed by that conversation. I can't imagine having it. But I think the fact that obviously I responded so much, I loved this character so much, and it was a sort of unsaid thing that we both, I think, felt the same way. And we had quite an epistolary relationship before shooting, because he asked me to give my notes on the script, which I always find amazing when it's somebody who's writing the script, tends to be kind of much more open to other people's opinion. I've found that with writer-directors, tend to be a bit more kind of free with that. And it was Christmas and my mum was coming and there was all sorts of chaos, and I kept saying, oh, I can't do, because if you're going to ask me to do notes, I went to Oxford, I'm going to do some notes. I'm not gonna,
be ready.
Yeah, I'm not going to write a couple of things on a Post-it. I'll do my homework. So I kept saying, can I do it after Christmas? And he kept saying, please can I have them? I really want them. I'm doing another draft. And so then I sent this kind of gigantic, epic long email, which he managed to not seem too offended by. And then we went back and forth like that for quite a while, with me, sort of mining the novel and also, because there are so many different characters and different names, and you kind of need to know what the relationships are very early. I loved how he fixed that, actually.
Right. In terms of their introductions.
Yes, it can be a little bit confusing in the novella, even going, who on earth are these people? Mm-hmm. And, some of them have the same last name. I don't understand the relationship and all of that. So there were some kind of clarity things, and then there's some kind of greedy things of going, can we put this back in and all that. So I think by the time we turned up, he's not somebody who does a lot of rehearsal or anything. So we'd had this kind of, rather old-fashioned epistolary thing.
Which is a fancy word for letters or emails, I guess.
Yes, emails. Yeah.
If you were to go back and look at what you were writing him and the kinds of concerns or the kinds of conversations that you were having, what were they? Were they around a certain theme? Where there's a certain idea that you kept hammering about that you were really focused on in terms of this character? Or was it a broader story, broader interest, broader questions that you were pursuing?
I know some of it was just sort of in terms of clarity and character and stuff like that, and some of it was really, oh my God, there's some really delicious stuff that can't we put that back in, and we could have made 3 movies, given that the novella is short and unfinished, and yet it's kind of jam packed full of amazing, terrible things that this person is saying and doing. So
I want to talk about the physical production of this film, and it's something that I suspect was very important, I hope, in finding character, and that is costume design. And your fittings and working with a costume designer, are you an actor who finds you can help discover character, especially in a period film, through wardrobe? And if so, how did this help you figure out this character?
I mean, especially in a period film, it's always, the underwear is terribly telling, in a period.
Tell me more.
Well, it really kind of affects how you stand, how you sit, how fast you can move around, how you speak, all of that stuff. Having a really serious corset on is, rather an impediment to rushing up the stairs or whatever. But yeah, Whit and I, in our, grand romance of letters, had talked a lot about wanting Lady Susan to start in kind of widow's weeds and black, and then sort of ease out into a sort of mauve, and then just rush right into, harlot red again.
Enough with the morning wardrobe.
Yeah, exactly. And I really like that. And Whit was very into veils, and he liked the idea of there being kind of veils and all that in the beginning. But I've done a lot of period movies in England, and certainly I've done, varying types of budget. And I was expecting what very often happens, because we have wonderful costume houses in England. I was expecting that you're wearing Kate Winslet's dress from something and somebody else's dress from something else. And that, very often happens, and do very well about it. But with this quite modest budget, I was astonished by the fact that the costume designer, Emma, sort of made pretty much all Chloe and my clothes from scratch. And so, you would come to work and there'd be kind of a sort of Christmas present in your trailer of this kind of complete outfit with hat and gloves and shoes. And I don't know how they did it. I to this day don't know how they did it. But it was a really big endeavor.
You have incredibly rich dialogue in this film, and yet I think you just said you didn't have a lot of time for rehearsal. So how do you get, as an actor, to wrap your tongue around this dialogue and present it in a way that works in concert with the other actors?
I mean, I'm not frightened of dialogue. I love a bit of dialogue, me. But the thing that was worrying, and one of the things that I kept asking him in the weeks leading up to shooting was, will there be a final draft of the script so that I can learn it? Like when you do a play, if you're going to play King Lear, quite often get some of the learning out of the way before you turn up. And that was what I was planning on doing, because we had, I think we'd been allowed 27 days to shoot the movie, which is not a lot considering how verbose my character in particular is. And he was quite cagey about that and shady. And what I'd forgotten in the 18 years in which I'd not worked with Whit is that, he's amazingly well prepared, and obviously he writes his own scripts. The other big strength of his is that he's incredibly responsive to the moment, which can mean that you're sitting in hair and makeup, having spent all of last night learning pages and pages of dialogue, only to find that he's switched them all around, all the different parts of the speech around, and then has added something else completely different about Connecticut or something, and just sort of expects you to, to say it. And I felt like I was having some kind of, preventative Alzheimer's workout, so it's the sort of equivalent of doing Sudoku. Yeah, so I'll be furious if I do end up getting it, actually, after all that. I want my money back. So that was a concern. And so really, as well, because the schedule was so short, you don't want to be that person who, the costume designer has pulled these costumes out of nowhere. We've got these amazing country houses. Everyone's on their game. And then, Kate's forgotten her lines. It just couldn't happen. So I think I was awake most of the 27 days.
Watching the movie is almost like watching a play, and that Whit has cast incredibly talented actors who are razor sharp with dialogue. Yeah. And they come from a very, broad spectrum of backgrounds. Can you talk a little bit about the ensemble, and especially maybe your daughter, and the kinds of scenes that you were able to share together, and what the creative partnership was like, and how much freedom you had, even though Whit is very precise about what his films are going to look like and sound like, what kind of freedom you had as actors within those parameters to maybe depart and maybe find something that was new and different?
I mean, it wasn't, like I said, it was an odd one because it was such a short shoot. So there was no sort of overspill into kind of people doing wild drunken evenings. And, I think everyone was so busy rushing home and learning their lines. It wasn't the most kind of social, movie. But I do remember the read-through where pretty much everyone turned up except for Tom Bennett, who was shooting something else. And very often if an actor can't be there and has to be beamed in by Skype, it creates a kind of scrim between you and them to where it just doesn't feel... Anyway, he'd showed up with this complete performance, almost exactly like that, to everyone's astonishment, and derailed the read-through immediately. I mean, we were all falling about. I mean, it was really funny and really even more extraordinary considering he wasn't even physically there, and it was, on a computer screen. It was brilliant. So that was wonderful, and I think Whit really liked that, and consequently, Whit wrote more scenes. I think he got very inspired by
More commandments.
More commandments, exactly, and also I think because he'd not expected to find an actor who can make "How are you?" funny, and that's kind of a big thing. I think Whit thought, I've got some fairly boring dialogue here. Holy shit, this guy's killing it. So the P's actually were written while we were shooting the whole P's thing, which was wonderful. And so, that was lovely. And then, everybody was wonderful. I loved my daughter. That was the only hard thing, was she was so sweet and Welsh and just talented and lovely, and, having to be so rotten to her all the time was quite difficult. But I was also, mainly at her either learning lines furiously in a panic, right, a sweat, or changing costumes, which is no small feat in itself because it takes a bit of a while and everybody's going, oh, hurry up, So I felt like a little bit sort of at a remove from the kind of the gang, because I always was talking more than everybody else, right, or changing clothes more than everybody else. And I remember the dance scene. I've suddenly, to my horror, realised that other people had the odd free afternoon to go and do a dance rehearsal. And I was told, we're doing this today, and there was no time. So there's horrible... everybody's sort of hopping, sort of hoppy dancing. Everyone's sort of hopping in the right direction. Then, of course, I'd completely hop left and ruin it and start again. So I felt very clumsy in that scene.
Kate Beckinsale, thank you so much. And thank you guys for coming out.